Travel and Things, in association with Rugged Wear, Real People, Real Clothing, Real Solutions, presents In Conversation With. I'm your host, David Batsoffen, and joining me today is Glen Thompson. And we're talking pangolins today, would you believe? Because it seems that pangolin scales are almost the scales du jour. Glen, good day. Welcome to you. Thank you very much for joining me. Why are pangolin so sought after, hunted, utilized for everything except what they're meant to be, which is watching them trundle around in the bush?
Hi, David. Thanks for having me. The demand for pangolin scale in Asia has become quite high because pangolin scales is made out of the same thing as rhino horn, the keratin.
Right.
And in the TCM markets, there are about 60 commercially made products that actually contain pangolin scale in them in the Asian TCM markets in China. So yes, because they've almost wiped out all the Asiatic species of pangolin, because there are 8 species worldwide.
Right.
And they've basically wiped out theirs. They've now come to Africa to get the pangolins from Africa. So we've got 4 species in Africa
Right.
that you find throughout Africa. There's one in Southern Africa called the Timix pangolin. Then in Central and East Africa, you get the boreal pangolins, which are your white and black belly pangolins. And then in Northeast Africa, you get what they call the giant pangolin, which is the biggest of the 4 species in Africa.
Just as a matter of interest, oh, pardon me, it's got an itch in my throat. I have a pangolin in my throat. On average, how many scales are there per animal? Or are these poachers relentless and they'll take anything from a baby which can fit into your hand to 20-kilo males?
Well, the average density from is about 20%. So 20% of the body weight is about actual scale value. So it's a very small margin, but your poachers will take young pangolins, adult pangolins, any pangolin they can find, especially up in Central and East Africa.
Right.
Because they actually use the bush meat, and then the scales is a byproduct which they sell off. Now, in Southern Africa, like South Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, we've got a very unique trade where they actually trade in live pangolins.
Right.
And this actually goes back to cultural beliefs of the people like the vendors, the Shona, and all of that. It's a highly praised animal in their local culture. So at least in Southern Africa, we're able to rescue live pangolins, but that trade can change at any time.
But now, once a scale has been removed, does it regenerate, or once a scale is gone, it's gone?
Once it's gone, it's gone. It's not like a rhino horn that grows back. Basically, the only way to remove a scale from a pangolin is you have to boil it, and then the scales actually come off and from the skin.
Oh, dearie me! I didn't want you to. I didn't want to have that visual in my head as I chat with you.
No.
And do our South African pangolin, those that are poached, and I know you spend a lot of time in and out of courtrooms, making cases, having cases delayed. Are the courts becoming more receptive to the fact that our supply is getting less and less, and these poachers have to be treated, with the disdain that they should have, which is long jail term sentences?
We have seen a change in recent years because there has been a lot more educational done with the judicial system.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a couple of years ago, the guys were getting off on bails of 500 Rand and then, jumping the border, going back to the countries from where they came from. But lately, we have started seeing 8-year sentences, quite a couple of them recently last year in Gauteng and in Limpopo. Because according to the Nemba Act and TOPS Act, depending which one you fall under in South Africa, it is about, according to governments, 10 years imprisonment or 10 million Rand fine or both. So we have seen an improvement in the outcomes of court cases where we are actually getting up to 8 years and plus imprisonment for these poachers.
But now the poachers that you're catching here, these are the low guys on the totem pole. These are not the guys that are controlling the industry, which is what I should imagine you really want to get, is the kingpins to stop the trade. But having said that, who came up with the discovery, for want of a better word, that pangolin scales can be used like rhino horn? That's the person I want to beat over the head with the biggest stick I can find.
Look, pangolin scales have actually been used right back all the way into the Ming Dynasty. It used to be used as body armor. There've been boots sold off in Texas that are made out of pangolin scales. So pangolin scales have been used quite widely throughout the world. And the local usage here in Africa has normally always been sustainable because, in West Africa, there's been a lot of the bushmeat poaching, and the scales was actually a waste product.
Okay.
So they used to always discard the scales, the local people in that. In Southern Africa, it's a highly praised animal. Only a Sangoma is allowed to kill a pangolin. They believe if anyone else kills a pangolin and spill the blood of a pangolin on the ground, it's going to cause 7 years drought. But in local usage in Africa, the scales is very minimal. It's sustainable. Some of the Sangomas do use other body parts for traditional healing of blood noses. They do believe that pangolin scales, if you grind it up and mix it in with your dugger kraal when you're building the kraals, will protect the sheep and cattle. But they use very minimal. Most Sangomas of pangolin skin would last them 10 years.
Right.
The biggest problem and the biggest demand is coming from the Asiatic countries,
Okay.
Vietnam, Asia, China, because there's just been an explosion, the same as with the rhino horn. They believe it's keratin, they believe it can cure cancer, they believe it's aphrodisiac. And like I said earlier, there's 60 commercially made products that contain pangolin scale. Now, it can be pangolin scale with bear bile or pangolin scale with lion bone, but there's 60 commercially made products that you can find in the TCM markets.
You want to just go, really, can you not find an alternative? I can almost understand the bushmeat because people have to live. And all the local reserves that I visited over the recent years have found that there's been an increase in bushmeat poaching. They'll take a warthog, they'll take an impala, anything they can snare, basically. So pangolin, I should imagine, falls within that realm if it's being eaten. But as you say, the scales are now a byproduct and a very reasonably priced
lucrative
byproduct.
Yeah.
Lucrative is the word I'm looking for.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, no, that is true. Like as I said, in Southern Africa, not much of the meat is actually eaten. But during COVID, we did have one case of where a gentleman was caught with one of the pangolins, and he had actually eaten it because he had no other meat, but he still had the skin.
Okay.
So yes, poverty does play a part in it when it comes into the meat poaching side. But I'd be quite honest, most of the poaching of the pangolins in Southern Africa is actually monetary based. It's greed. They want to sell it for profit.
But now, why? Pardon me. What you say for greed, but how do they get these live animals out of Africa, let alone just South Africa? How do you put them on a plane in a bag?
Normally, once an animal's been caught in Africa, by the time it leaves Africa, it's no longer alive.
Okay.
So it's either been descaled and the meat's been eaten as bushmeat. So a majority of the trade, especially out through Lagos, Nigeria, is probably one of the biggest export ports of the country for pangolin scales. It's basically all the scales have already been moved and then put in these big 40 kg Hessian bags.
Right.
So you don't find live animals being exported from the country. It's only purely scales.
And you also can't, with rhino horn, I know that they can tag it. They can insert chips and that type of thing, so they know where the horn has come from. But that's a single item. You can't tag a pangolin on every scale to try and figure out where it comes from.
No, if you're looking at about 20% of the body weight, they're probably about 200 scales on pangolin, and they vary from the size of my little finger all the way up to about that big. Their scales, so it's very, very. You can't. probably the only way they could probably keep a record is DNA testing, some sort of DNA method, similar to what they do with rhinos with Cindy Hop and
Yeah.
the Rhodes project. But nothing like that's been done, as far as I know, anywhere in Africa or the world at the moment with pangolin DNA.
Now, I at one stage believed that the only defense that a pangolin, pardon me, pangolin had was to curl into a ball, which was both good and bad, because it curls into a ball, you just pick the thing up, drop it in a bucket, put a lid on the bucket, and you've got your pangolin. But I subsequently found out that if you grab them and they close their tail on you, you end up screaming in the most unbelievable pain. And in fact, the instance
Yes,
that I heard of, and whether it's true or not, the animal had to be anesthetized in order for the person to get their hand released.
yes, no. Look, their most natural defense is just to roll up in a ball, and that, when they're out in the field. But their tails can cause damage.
Right.
Their scales are very sharp. Their scales are like little razor blades. So if they swipe you with their tail, I've got plenty of scars on my arms. And yeah, I mean, I've even a pangolin that we recovered from the trade managed to wrap himself around my leg. I actually had to sit down with him at the vet's practice for about an hour and a half for him to release my leg before he'd come loose.
Really?
So yes, their little tails can be quite dangerous. And I would say, if the tail connects you in the right place, and your hand's in the right place, they will actually break your bones, because the tail, the edge of it, it's got scales, and they're all
Yes.
smoothed off from the dragon. And it's like a little scorpion. They come back and they flip their tails back like this onto themselves. So the tail will hit their scales. And if your hand's there in between, yes, it can cause quite some damage.
But now, why is it that pangolin are so, they're seen almost as the unicorn of the bushveld? Now, I have to say this is one of the only pictures that I've got of pangolin, because in 53 years in the bush, I've only seen them in the bush once, and that was this instance in November of 2019. But they're like a unicorn. Everybody wants to see them. And I don't know if it's the same with you, Glenn, but I've gotten onto vehicles and the field guide has said to me, "What would you like to see?" And I go, "Something die in front of my lens or a pangolin." And they go, "The killer's much easier."
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, if you think about it, pangolins have been around for about 85 million years.
Right.
So they've been around for a very long time. But they're also very elusive creatures. And not many people get to see them, especially game drives and that. Because majority of pangolins are more, not all of them are exactly nocturnal. You see
Right.
them during the day. But that's mainly during, the more drier months, where it's a lot harder for them to find food. But a couple of them that we've done releases with, and that we've seen pangolin waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning and then foraging till 8, and then they go off and find a burrow and they go back to bed, and then they come out late afternoon again.
Right.
So for people to see them out in the actual bushveld on a vehicle is extremely, extremely difficult. I mean, they disappear within nanoseconds. You don't see them. They look like they might be small, and they bipedal, and they only walk on their two back legs, but they can move very quickly if they want to move.
They can indeed, because this particular one, we went back to go and fetch some other guests. And by the time we got back, he disappeared down an aardvark hole, and that was the end of that.
Oh yes, yeah, no, they'll disappear very quickly. And as I said, I mean, I've worked with some of the rehabilitation centers in the country, and
Right.
actually worked with pangolins in rehab. And I mean, I've lost a pangolin on rehab, but look, we found it afterwards, mad panic and having everyone come out to the walking site and all walking like in a straight line to try to find the pangolin.
Yeah.
But if you're not paying attention, as I said, they disappear within 2-3 seconds. They're gone. You don't see them anymore. And especially if it's a very thick thicket, if they keep still,
Yeah.
you cannot see them with their scales. Their scales are very, very good camouflage for them, especially in thickets and that, and depending on the terrain you're in. So, and they're very quiet. They don't make a lot of noise when they walk. Sometimes you can hear the scales rubbing against each other, but when they step on their feet, they're normally very, very quiet, unless it's very, very dry conditions, like leaves on the floor that from winter's time and that crack. But other than that, pangolins can be extremely quiet when they move around in the bush.
Now, when you have you've caught poachers, they've got live animals. Obviously, those animals are taken to a clinic of some sort. Everything is made certain that they're in good health. Often they're badly treated by the poachers, dehydrated, pregnant, those type of things. When you release them, do you release them with tracking devices so that you can keep a record of their movements, or do you just go to a safe reserve where you believe it's safe and just release them without any devices on?
A couple of years ago, we used to do what we called hard releases. You know, we'd recover the pangolin off the trade, we'd take it to the vets, they'd look at it, and everything seemed fine with it, and we'd release it. But that's all changed over the years because we've learned so much more about pangolin within the last couple of years. That, you know, every pangolin is compromised and will need medical treatment.
Right.
So, and then when we do release them, we do have to monitor them. So they are fitted with two tags. They're fitted with a satellite tag and they're fitted with a telemetry tag. So we can monitor them, because there have been incidences where, you know, we've got a very good release site. They've got, you know, a good population of ants and specific ants.
Right.
And we do a release, but we've actually had to pull that pangolin and then move it back to rehab and move it to a different site.
Okay.
Because you must remember, we don't actually know the region where these pangolins are coming from when we're getting them off their
True enough. Yeah.
A lot of them are actually coming in from across the border, Zimbabwe.
Right.
There are a lot of pangolins coming from Zimbabwe. So, you know, monitoring has become crucial in the release of pangolins. You know, because we don't always know where they come from. So some of the release sites actually monitor their pangolins for up to 2 years.
Okay.
But that will also be for research purposes. So we've got a classification of like the sites. We've got what we call a release site, and we've got research sites. So release sites, the pangolin will go there. The ground team will be trained up, you know, what to look for in a pangolin, how they're walking, if they're walking properly, you know, that they're not dragging their tail. And they normally monitored for up to about 6 months. And then the tags are removed and the pangolins let go to be free again. Yeah. And then release sites, they are monitored for up to 2 years. Now, but that's for research purposes.
Are you guys, firstly, what is it that Transfrontier Africa does? Because I know you're involved with them. And secondly, are you guys like some sort of pangolin SWAT team that your cell phone goes in the middle of the night and it's, you know, dive. We have an incident. We've got some poachers. Get out there quickly, and then there's a firefight, and pangolin are rescued, and poachers are shot, or jailed, or arrested. Is it that exciting, or is it just a case of somebody's found a pangolin? Can you come and fetch it?
Okay. Well, where Transfrontier Africa come in, they've actually employed me, and I do work with the police throughout the country on pangolin operations.
Okay.
And I also do the national database on pangolin. So, you know, every pangolin case in the country will get reported to me. I put it on a national database, and then we also assist the police in Limpopo at sting operations.
So is that where pangolin conservation comes in?
No, pangolin conservation Limpopo is actually more from the research side and the rehabilitation side. That's with other colleagues of mine that I work with in northern Limpopo. So what will normally happen is we will get information that someone's trying to sell a pangolin, and then we've got a network of CIs throughout the country who work with us, our confidential informants. And then we'll request proof of life from the suspect poacher who's got a pangolin. So we'll say to him, look, we either need a video or photo with the current dates and time to make sure that he does actually have a pangolin and not a fishing scam. And sometimes these negotiations can take 2 to 3 days. Other times it can take up to a week to gain the confidence of the poacher to set up a meet. So where we can, you know, kind of say we're going to meet and buy the pangolin from him. But in the interim, there's a lot that needs to happen before we can actually go to the meet. You know, there's certain laws in this country. We need to approach the National Prosecuting Authority to apply for what they call a 252A document. which basically gives us the right with the police to do an entrapment case, because that's basically what it is, because our CI is communicating with the poacher. So we need to make sure from a legal basis that we're doing it all right. So it's not just a matter of always we get a phone call, I know this guy's got a pangolin, jump in our cars 5 minutes out, we go. You know, there's a whole legal process that we need to follow when we get information about pangolin on the illegal wildlife trade. There have been a couple of cases, you know, where we've got community handovers, you know, where a chief or an elder in a community, a pangolin's been brought to him, and then he's phoned nature conservation and said, look, once people in the village have brought me this animal, we know it's endangered, then I'll drive out, go collect it, just take it back to a vet to make sure that it is, you know, healthy, it hasn't been kept, you know, locked up for a bit of while, so they do blood tests. And I mean, I've taken pangolin back to the areas where they've been taken out the following day. So it all varies, you know. But the sting operations, you know, we work with a lot of people depending which province we're in. You know, Limpopo, we've got a lot of other people we work with, like Imoyo, Imoyo Kalula Wildlife Center, who does the rehabilitation. They will come out, and then the other private security companies that we work with within the Limpopo region, that we can use to back up the police in Limpopo, because I think, you know, in the southern parts of Limpopo, we've only got 2 stock theft officers for the whole region. So, you know, whereas in Joburg, we've got a strong force of about 30 police officers to call on at any time in Joburg for pangolin.
Seems rather weird, because finding pangolin in Joburg is almost an impossibility, whereas finding them in Limpopo is a bit easier, although I suppose they come through to the Muti markets and that type of thing in order to sell them.
Yes, and also what we have noticed is the price for pangolin in Joburg is a lot higher. So, you know, the closer you get to Joburg, the higher the price goes up. And we've noticed that. I mean, a couple of years ago, the guys were trying to sell pangolin for about 5,000 to 10,000 rand in like Messina, Limpopo area. But as soon as it would get to Joburg, it could jump up to about 100,000 rand.
Wow, that is really scary.
And I think that's,
you know, that's what's driving them. How can the ordinary man and woman in the street get involved in this type of operation, or do you need specific qualifications? If somebody phones you and says, Glenn, I want to help you stop pangolin poaching.
I think the biggest thing at the moment is, you know, just creating awareness, educating people, because I mean, even last week when I was at the court for a pangolin case, I spoke to one of the officers at the court, and he didn't even know what a pangolin is. So there's still a lot of people out there who don't actually know what a pangolin is, and they don't actually know the plight of the pangolin. You know, everyone knows rhino and elephant because these are big animals that you can see every time you go on a game drive.
Correct.
A pangolin is not many people get to see it, so they don't talk about it. It's not known like the rhino or elephant or lion and things like that. So I think awareness, and then also supporting, you know, the various organizations that are involved with, you know, rehabilitating these animals, taking them back out. And one thing that I'm still very strong in is supporting community projects like education in the rural communities, and you know, because they need to be educated. Because if you look at the history of South Africa, unfortunately, you know, with apartheid era and everything like that, the local communities have always been excluded from wildlife. So they don't have the same thoughts, process, and value for wildlife like a lot of other people do. You know, I value wildlife, you value wildlife, but it's the way we've been brought up. And, you know, a lot of the rural communities have always been excluded from it, so they don't see the value in wildlife. And that is where we need to change it from the ground roots upwards. And, you know, education, educate the people. So I think from a general public perspective, is just bringing more awareness to it. I'll be honest with you, a lot of our sting operations actually come from public tip-offs.
Really?
I'd say about 60% of our sting operations is actually information from the general public.
Now, just
you know,
on
someone
that
will
note,
call us and say, "Oh no, they've."
I was going to say, just on that note, how dangerous are these sting operations? Do the poachers come armed to these meetings? And if they take place in a
We
car
have
park,
had
are people in the car park, the general public going to and from the shops doing their bit? Are they in any danger, or how does it work?
um yeah, look, a lot of the operations happen outside garages, like engine garages or shell garages. We have had them happen in the shopping mall parking lots in Pretoria and Irene, outside post nets, things like that. So, but as for the danger, I can only recall maybe 3 cases
Mm-hmm.
where firearms have been involved. I was involved in a case in Brits where I actually took chase of a suspect that fled the scene, me and another guy who was with me, and we heard gunshots behind us. So, normally the people aren't armed,
Okay.
but we have had a couple of cases where the people have been armed, and there have been a couple of cases where, shots have been fired.
Yeah. Okay.
But the norm is, there's no weapons involved. But that can change at any stage. The minute it gets more syndicated, like with the rhino horn and things like
Correct.
that.
Now then, big
Because at the
weaponry is
moment
involved.
it's all, yeah, because a lot of it over the last 5 years have all been opportunistic poaching and it hasn't been syndicated. That's where we've been very, very lucky in Southern Africa. It hasn't become an organized crime,
Yeah.
like the rhino horn and everything. But unfortunately, it has already started going that way. And that's one of the things that we've always been worried about for the last 2-3 years with the pangolin poaching in Southern
Yeah.
Africa. As soon as it gets syndicated, it's going to become a lot harder. Number one, they're not going to trade in live pangolins anymore, because when you've got a live pangolin in the trade, it normally lasts around about 14 days, and then that pangolin normally dies. So they've got a time limit with a live pangolin, which is normally 2 weeks to sell it. Otherwise, it normally 99% of the time it actually dies in their hands, and then they just discard it. But over the last 5 years, with the number of the arrests and the information that's coming out, people are learning that, it's the scales which is the value, which is very, very concerning to a lot of me and my colleagues in Southern Africa, because we've dealt with a lot of the live trade. But we have seen slowly over the last couple of years, the trade in skins in Southern Africa is slowly starting to pick up, which is concerning.
Which is really sad. Glenn,
yes,
we've just had a little notification from the powers that be at Zoom saying you're almost out of time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I see 9 minutes or so.
Yeah. So quickly before we leave, is there a website that people can go to, the Transfrontier website that people can go to and have a look what it is that they can help with, be it donations or be it information or whatever?
Okay. With the Transfrontier Africa website, it's a very new project that they've just taken on with the pangolin. I'm actually driving the whole project. So I'm not too sure if they have put anything on the website yet.
Okay.
But if people do want more information, about pangolins, there's the ICN Pangolin Specialist Group for Southern Africa. There's also pangolin.africa. I actually run the sightings number for pangolin.africa. So any pangolin sightings, people can report to the WhatsApp number where it's all kept onto a database.
Right.
As I said, I'd need to find out from the Transfrontier Africa people, media people, if they've put anything on their website so far.
They can, people
but
watching this can just go and have a look. If there's nothing on pangolin, at least you've looked at the website and it exists. Glenn,
as I said, it's a fairly new project for Transfrontier Africa.
Okay.
But I've been working with the pangolin for about 5 years. So.
All right. And I know you've worked with other animals, and at a later stage, we're going to chat to you about those. I wanted to stay focused on the pangolin today. Like they say in America, we thank you for your service. I know that it's a thankless task, because I know how hard you guys work. I know at least one of your CIs, and I know how hard he works. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for keeping them safe. And let's hope that at some particular point in time, your jobs become redundant because there's no more poaching and they're just left alone to be pangolin.
Okay, no, 100%. Thanks, David, for having me, and hopefully we can chat again soon.
That would be wonderful. My guest this afternoon on In Conversation With has been Glen Thompson. Glen, once again, thank you for joining me.
No, thank you, David, and thank you to your viewers.